Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia. Welcome to a patch notes rundown video, and here we're covering patch 1.5.2, which just became live on the server a day ago. And alongside this patch going live, we also have the beta version of patch 1.5.3 coming out. It's a rather short patch for 1.5.3, so we'll be covering that together with this. So as many of you probably have already done, you probably played the 1.5.2 beta for a while now, so you probably are already familiar with some of these changes. But in case you're just updating to the live version, let's just go over everything real quick so that we can cover everything. So starting off, we have Diplomacy Fix, which I'm going to just summarize as things that now work as intended, because that's pretty much all the fix here. There is no buffs or nerfs, it's just basically bug fixing. And the major fix is revolving around mercenary treaties. Now, there were a lot of different bugs with mercenary treaties. There were bugs where if you don't have it as the first item in the diplomacy deal, it could cause an issue with the timing out at the wrong time. Had to do with the strange 20 turns of cash payment rather than 10 turns. There's also graphic errors when sometime your bar at the top would remain on after the treaty is over, or maybe reset itself at the end rather than just turn off. But it was still kind of working as intended, but it just wasn't turning off graphically. And another major issue with this mercenary treaty was that a lot of AI factions could get mercenary treaties with AI banded factions, which was originally not the intent. The intent was that it was only available for the players to trigger these treaties and get asked by AI factions to go into a mercenary treaties and not just have all sorts of random mercenary treaties going around the map. I think there's also a later on multiplayer issue with two players who are both playing a bandit giving each other mercenary treaties, but we'll see that later in the multiplayer section. Then we have a fix with Liu Bei not being able to annex any Han Empire territory using his Unity mechanic in the Mandate of Heaven DLC. We also have an Empire feud settlement issue where the Emperor cannot settle feuds, where you can go into the diplomacy to settle a feud, but the two factions will still be at war. So that's now fixed. Another fix here is that Lu Bu can now use Coerce as he's intended to, where previously this option was missing from his diplomacy menu. And then another important fix here is you can actually finally make peace in alliance wars. It used to be if you get declared into alliance war, you don't have the option to get the peace deal for the entire alliance war, and the only way to get peace is to break the alliance until there's only one faction, and then you can peace out with that last faction normally. Other than that, you're going to be stuck in a war with all members of the alliance for the duration of the war, which is forever, because you can't peace out with that entire alliance. So that's fixed. And then they fix another kind of exploit bug where you could ask for ultimatum when you're already at war with a faction. So this is obviously very broken because you're taking no risk, because the penalty for asking for ultimatum in diplomacy is that if they don't agree to your deal, they will declare war on you. But if you could ask for ultimatums while you're already at war, you're basically not getting penalized and getting free diplomacy point. So they fixed that. And then revolving around Alliance War, there's another different type of bug. And this bug is that if you already had individual wars with members of the Alliance, and then you get declared an Alliance War on top of that, you get basically duplicate war declarations, and you're stuck in that war because you have two sets of different war with them, and you can't piece out of them individually. So that's also fixed. And the last fix is just quality of life fix. They somehow took away the notification for vassals joining the war. You often see a notification at the beginning of turn that says Faction A asked their vassal Faction B to join a war. But then usually there should be an icon on the bottom of the notification that tell you who they are going to war with, but that's gone for a while. It's finally back with the beta patch and now going live. So that's definitely a great quality of life fix, or else you just don't know what's going on through the notification at the beginning of turn. So that's all the diplomacy fix, and they're, like I said, things that are fixed to work as intended. So moving on to slightly more patch-like changes, we have some character changes. There's quite a few page. I broke it down to 3 pieces. So the first piece here is that fondness was added to more characters in A World Betrayed. Now the reason they did that is probably to trigger more historical looks for factions, where characters that worked for this faction historically would have the fondness so that they would more likely stay with the faction and also more likely join that faction. And alongside that change to characters, they also dropped salary for all characters in the game. It used to be 100 salary, and then they changed it on patch 1.5.0 to 200 because they introduced the title system. But now, because it goes to 200, it's actually quite expensive. That was actually 4 rank up from the previous patch. So they kind of took the middle ground, and now the starting salary level is 150. So this is a general buff for all factions in the game. Now they kept the governor level and the minister level of the positions the same at 250 base and 350 base. So you're still getting that same 100 increase and 200 increase when you give them a position in your court that's either the governor rank, which is the minister rank, technically the 9 minister positions on the bottom. And then the minister rank here that it's written here in the patch note is actually the Grand Excellencies and the higher tier, basically the level 4 happiness and the level 8 happiness difference right there. And then another change with character salary is that what's new with patch 1.5.2 is that all family members will have 0 salary. So people you marry into the family, all your kids, all your faction leader and wife will all be 0 salary. So this is once again a pretty big buff and allows you to keep a nice roster of kids. Now obviously the drawback here is with more kids you have some satisfaction issues with rivalry between siblings, rivalry for heir, and just sibling rivalry in general. So you're going to have some satisfaction issue that you have to fix in other areas, but you do have access to 0 salary characters. And this kind of make adoption early on a definitely viable strategy if you want to save money down the road. It costs 4,000 gold to adopt, and it's going to save you at least 150, right? Because each character's salary is 150. So it will pay you back around, I'm guessing 26, 27 turns. It will pay you back. So if you do it early on enough for a character that you know you're going to keep, you can save on salary down the line. Now, 27 turn might sound crazy and very long investment, but if you look at some of the building upgrades you're doing, when you upgrade an iron mine, for example, between levels, you're paying 3,000 gold for a 100 extra per turn gold. So that return is 20 to 30 turns depending on your multiplier on the industry income. So you're kind of saving the money in the same fashion with adopting generals. Now, once again, you have to be careful with satisfaction, especially in the early game on higher difficulties, but this generally is a pretty nice buff. Now, alongside player enjoying lower salaries, they have also halved the AI salary requirements for court nobles, administrator, and ministers. So I think the game is just trying to buff up the AI factions to use more characters, as they probably find out that the AIs can't afford them in their courts and it might cause unhappiness. And with the new turncoat mechanic, if that causes unhappiness, it gives the player a lot more opportunity to steal characters. So I think they're trying to find that delicate balance, and giving AI half salaries for all their positions make it easier for them to give out titles and keep them in these higher court positions. And then they have a change that's really strange. So it says increased time characters with unique art remains in the character pool after they leave a faction or their faction is destroyed from 20 turns to 50 turns. So what this means is, say you have a legendary champion or a legendary character, doesn't matter what class, and their faction is destroyed, you really want to recruit them. And they don't show up in your pool, but they show up in some other faction's pool, and they don't get recruited for 20 turns. Then this character is wiped out from the game. You will no longer be to recruit them, they just won't show up. So to prevent this from happening, they lengthen that time to 50 turns. So this allows them to bounce around in more recruitment pools, because sometimes you don't recruit them for a while, they go to another pool. Same thing for AI factions. If they don't recruit the character for a while, they might go to your pool a bit later. That's why sometimes you see characters that have been in the pool for longer than a year. Say you're on year 204, and you can see that character left their last faction in 202. And that gap is them bouncing around different recruitment pools until they landed in yours. So that's kind of what this kind of tries to change. 20 turns is basically 4 years in the game. It seems pretty long, but if they don't bounce to your pool, they might just disappear. 50 definitely makes it a lot better. That's 10 years in the game. That's a long time. And then we have just a couple bug fixes for faction classes. So Guos's class was incorrectly displaying as a Vanguard previously before this patch. So now he's back to a champion. This didn't cause any issues. It was just him showing up as a Vanguard icon when he was in battle. There's other issues with this that's worse that we'll talk about later on. Another change they did for balancing is that they changed Wu Jing's personality so that he becomes less aggressive in campaign, giving more time for Sun Ce to complete his objectives. This has to do with the legacy of Wu. I think on release, what happened was Wu Jing got hyper aggressive, expanding down south, taking some of the territories that you needed for your legacy, so that you either had to go to war with your uncle, which is another bug they actually should fix. They should program in that Wu Jing is related to Lady Wu, because I hate seeing AI factions that marry Lady Wu to Wu Jing. That's literally marrying the older sister to the younger brother. Very awkward. So that's the change there. And then they have another change for record modes that I actually don't experience very much because I don't really play that much record modes. Very, very little. I just tried it out a couple times. But first you have Chen Pu being fixed to apply correctly in Rise of Warlord. So he has bodyguard units. So I'm assuming he was still showing up as like a romance hero, just a solo hero on the battlefield, rather than with a group of bodyguards in the record mode. So this is fixed for all campaign that starts after getting the patch. And lastly, we have a group of heirs here that's more severe than Guo Si just displaying as a vanguard. These characters are miscategorized so that they can't equip the right armor. So for example, Han Fu should be a champion, but the game was identifying him as a commander and he couldn't get an armor. So it was really awkward. So that's the same for all these characters here. They're basically characters that were altered a little bit in A World Betrayed and they couldn't fix them correctly. So now they went back in and got them with the right class so they have the right armor. So moving on in characters, we have another list of characters. This time is characters that have missing traits. So if you guys played Mandate of Heaven, Liu Bei starts out with 3 missing traits that you have to discover. So you had empty trait slots. So there's characters in game that didn't flush out. These are mainly characters in the south, and there's some actually factions. Zhu Fu has a faction leader and they don't have traits. So when you capture these, you see missing traits icons. They went back in and actually give them trait. This is probably just an oversight before launch. And then another thing here is with the bandit revamp, Yan Baihu started out with, a brand new skill tree that goes with the bandit faction, but Zhang Yan and Zheng Jiang still had their old skill trees. So now they're revamped to have a correct bandit skill tree for them. And then you have another thing where just legendary character art missing resilience that goes with them. So that's Lady Mi and Tao Qian. Basically Tao Qian's entire faction in terms of legendary characters. So that's fixed. And then they made an alteration. I think we actually mentioned this change in our preview video when we did Cao Cao's preview when A World Betrayed was coming out. Lady Bian's a new character added into the game. And we noted that her robe gave resolve instead of authority, even though she was a commander character, so you would expect her to actually have authority. So I think they went back in and changed that. And then the next change I think is definitely me, because I complained about this quite a bit, and this is they used the wrong Yang Hong. So the problem here is the character Yang Hong, the way it's spelled for the second character, has 2 different characters that goes with it, and both of those characters are actually existed in the Three Kingdoms period. So one version of Yang Hong was this respected advisor who worked with Liu Bei in the later periods of Shu Han. And then this version of Yang Hong is actually lesser known and worked with Yuan Shu. And they had the wrong character when you look at the Chinese characters for who should be in Yuan Shu's faction at this time. So they made that change. Pretty glad that happened. And then the next change is an issue with Yuan Huan. So Yuan Huan we featured in our recent Cao Cao early game playbook video. He's an amazing commander that you get at turn 1 if you can capture him in that first battle that you often just ignore. He has really amazing agriculture development traits, and he actually has an extra assignment, which you actually would never use, because you almost want to immediately put him in as the commandery administrator, because he basically gives farmer boost to commanderies, even though he is a commander, and he's just going to be great for your development in Chen. So that's a character, if you're interested, go check out our Cao Cao early game playbook video, the recent one here. And then the next step here is there's an issue with Sun Quan and Zhang Zhao's event. So these are story events that are historical. A good example of this before is Zhao Yun's Savior of the Nation event. So you see that trigger a lot, and it refers to a battle in Changban. So Sun Quan and Zhang Zhao, his advisor, had many disputes during their relationship. And the game featured that with the event similar to Savior of Nation. But the trigger check for the event was just Zhang Zhao being in your faction, when in reality you need Zhang Zhao and Sun Quan for that event to kind of make sense. So they just made a small change there. And lastly, they just altered the starting rank to match a Rise of Warlord, the 190 start and the 194 start for characters like Ma Xiu and Ma Tie. So these are Ma Teng's other sons, the non-famous ones who get killed before they could do anything. These are Ma Chao's brothers. And I bet the situation was they were at higher level in the 190, and then when they put them in for A World Betrayed, they put them in as lower level, which doesn't make sense 4 years down the line. So I think they just matched it so it's consistent. So other than these character changes, we have another list. A lot of changes in patch 1.5.2. It's a very long and detailed patch, much needed for the game. And this group here in general is more along the side of bug fixing. You have items that you're unable to unequip from characters, tend to be items they start out with. Basically, the game didn't give them a normal version, the non-bronze version, the common version for you to switch to, so they can't unequip the version that they have. And then you have some tech fixes, which is basically typos in the campaign selection screen. You have a Ludger's death situation where he was spawning in 194, even though historically he would have died in 192. So since the sandbox nature of the game captures the accuracy of the start date, it doesn't make sense for Ludger to continue to spawn in the 194 campaign. So they went in ahead and fixed that. So that was just an unrealistic situation. Similar to Zhao Yun's Blue Blade. They fixed that as well because Zhao Yun doesn't get his Blue Blade until the Battle of Changban in 207. So he can't start in 194 with this weapon that technically belonged to Cao Cao. Another similar kind of error here is Guo Tu's age doesn't match and Sun Ce's death triggering too soon. So previously when you played 190, you had Sun Jian's death triggering a couple turns the game, and there's a chance that Sun Ce's death could trigger afterward. But now since Sun Ce gets his own faction and his own story, they reset the time zone, the number of turns when that event can trigger, to start at least from year 200 to better reflect his historical timing. And then the other fixes are just some simple stuff. Missing political background on the new characters added in for A World Betrayed. By political background, they mean, are they a bureaucrat? Are they a warlord? Are they a dynasty? For Liu Hong's court mechanic. So if they came in with a missing political background, they had to put these in for all characters just so that Liu Hong can recruit them and put them into their court. They also fixed some random stuff like Zheng Jiang being able to recruit an archer at the beginning on her starting retinue, even though she should have a revamped bandit recruitment list. So archers are off that list, so she technically shouldn't have that unit. They fixed that. They also give Tao Qian a new wife, Lady Gan, and I think the main reason they did this is the AI Tao Qian tend to marry Lady Mi, who is a legendary character that should go on to marry Liu Bei. So they kind of fixed that in so that Tao Qian is harder to marry the AI Lady Mi there. And then the other fixes are just turn 1 levers. This is the change with the title system, making people unsatisfied on higher difficulties so that you don't even get a chance to fix it. When you jump into game, they leave your faction right away. So they fixed that as well. So that's everything to do with characters. Next up, we're going to move on to campaign. And this is really, really long. We have 6 different cuts. And some of these are just bug fixes. Some are balancing. So first off, Fervor was not being removed at end of Mandate War. That is now fixed. We're going to see a common trend of a lot of Mandate of Heaven bugs. And this is definitely a big one because it's really annoying to deal with Fervor in the game unless you're the Yellow Turban and you want to push for Fervor. And then a couple balancing fixes is that personal victory from Prestige. So this is Lu Bu's personal victory. That's his unique faction resource. It grants him prestige as he gets more personal victories, and it's been halved because he was hitting Duke, he was hitting King way too fast. You just have to keep fighting, and this resource doesn't decay, so you're going to hit those ranks really, really fast. Likewise, bandit buildings also have their prestige halved for the exact same reason, although I don't think this fixed the problem because bandit armies at full loot also give 10 prestige, and you can just have single general entities on the map with full loot to trigger your prestige level to rank up fairly quickly. So that's another issue there, but they didn't fix that. What they fixed was that the bandit unique units will now be uncapped. So previously the programming error is because those unique units from other factions that are on the bandit network, say if you're playing as Yan Bai Hu and you go to the region around Taiyuan, you'll be able to recruit hidden axes that are unique to Zhengjiang. But that comes with a recruitment limit, so you can only recruit like 2 of them. And that was being applied to all the factions, even when you're playing as Zhengjiang, which makes no sense. So now your own unique unit can be recruited uncapped. You can recruit as many as you want, and this is definitely a much needed help for the bandit factions, which suffer quite a bit from having good mid-tier to late game units. All your units are just good in the early game, and they fall off quite a bit. And then another pretty big bug fix here is the family state. They reprogrammed this, recoded it. They found basically an unelegant solution to the issue of save and reloading, because sometimes your family state triggers incorrectly and it causes big swings in income for one turn. So instead of dealing with the actual load and save bug, which I think is a big issue because it triggers for other things as well, like your campaign movement range kind of reset a little bit, I think they kind of went in with the angle that if we nerf the save and load mechanic, it can prevent like save scumming. But for legendary difficulty, when you're playing in different sessions, it kind of hurts when you open up the game to an old save file that you jump in and you penalize for these effects. But at least they move family state out of it. So it's good for early game when you might be missing a huge chunk of family state money just simply because of bug. And speaking of bugs, there's a bug where Liu Hong has a mission that doesn't trigger correctly. They fixed that as well. And lastly, we mentioned in our overview video for Bandit Network, they have Silk and Spice multipliers, even though their own version of Silk and Spice counties do not actually produce Silk and Spice income. So unless you're hoping to capture a Han settlement that already built up the Silk and Spice commanderies, there's no reason for you to actually get multipliers from your reform tree, and they fixed it to just provide a commerce faction-wide bonus. So that's also a pretty good fix. Moving on, we have a couple quality of life fix. Your ultimate victory notification now triggers after taking 95 counties for Lu Bu. That's just a small thing. You know you won. The cutscene still triggers, I believe. I think it was just you didn't get the right notification at the end. And then another notification-related event situation is that in A World Betrayed, Cao Cao has an event where he historically takes over the Emperor, but the game noticed that the game doesn't check for if Cao Cao is still in the game. So if you knock him out, he can still steal the Emperor even though he's not in the game anymore. So that's awkward, and they fixed that. And then a few other fixes is Legacy of Wu bonus not being applied correctly to the right stat, and also guaranteeing that you get at least 1 turn worth of Reckless Luck when you finish any of the missions to keep you afloat. And then we come to 8 Princes fixes. You get foreign assignments, which are the kind of bandit spy assignments you added in. You can basically send a spy as an assignment in an enemy county, so you can gain vision and do other cool stuff. I don't use it very much, but they basically added that functionality into 8 Princes. And they also added Zhanma Jian and Imperial units to 8 Princes as well. So I think people have been asking for Imperial units for a long time in 8 Princes, and now we finally see them. And speaking of bandits and spies earlier, bandits now start with spies. So if you see characters coming to your court early on from bandit factions that are not willing to spy for you, there's a good chance they are actually spying on you. The reason why they made this change is to let you try out the mechanic of spying in foreign assignments. And then probably the biggest fix here for bandit players is if you play Zhengjiang, you can now finally demand tribute again. Before they disabled that for some reason, and that's a huge faction mechanic, so you can now demand tribute from Han factions once again. Lastly, there's just a small bug with one of Lu Zhi's books. Art of War was not unlocking correctly. You're going to see a lot of these small bug fixes. I think there's another one on the next group where maybe it's not here, but we're going to see one where Guo Jia was not triggering the greatest warrior hit list. We ran into that problem in our own campaign. We had to basically get a mod just to fix that, but now the game has actually fixed it. Going forward, we talked about this double bandit situation where the mercenary contract confuses the system and they give out the reward to the wrong people. If you're playing as 2-player multiplier and you're both bandits and you both give each other a mercenary treaty, using each other as the target, and then the game gets really confused. And then we have just some missing icons for population and fervor. Once again, on Mandate of Heaven, and then Sun Ce character age bug. So this is a situation where you get missions for Sun Ce, right? If you capture this commander, you get a character. Now, what happens when that character isn't of age yet? Like you rush that mission somehow. Like you have some really young generals that you're trying to get, like Lu Meng, Tai Shi. They're basically borderline coming of age. So the problem before is if you rush those missions when the character was not of age yet, they actually don't give you that character. Now the fix is, now if you finish and they're not of age, it's okay. You won't get it right away, but you get it very soon after whenever they hit their age and you see them join your court. So that's a very nice change. And then we have another change with World Betrayed mission sequence, the scripted ones, where Lu Bu is triggered to betray Liu Bei and take his land. But like many of these arbitrary land grab missions, if Liu Bei happens to not have the land that you're supposed to take, Lu Bu will take it from the player or someone else, which doesn't make a lot of sense. They fixed that so that Lu Bu can only take territories that actually belongs to Liu Bei. And then we have a few oversight bugs where leaders of AI factions can get titles even though the players can't. And then another issue is where you give the titles to an heir, but then when they rank up to become the leader, let's say the leader died of old age, they kept their titles. So you get that extra bonus when the leaders are not supposed to have titles. So that's also fixed. And a way out is a dilemma that can be triggered for some campaigns, and it was basically on save load being triggered multiple times as well. So that's another save load issue. I'm sure there's more, but they fixed that one. And going forward, we have a couple bugs with reserve levels from bandit stances. That's actually kind of ridiculous because you're not really using the share the spoil and raiding for reserves, but I guess they noticed some issue there and they fixed that. And we also see a buff for melee evasion bonus on the tech tree of the bandit network. I don't know why they went in and just changed this one little thing. It's not like a big buff, 3% to 5% on one reform. So I don't understand why this has changed. Now, the other changes below that, I understand. There was that invisible workshop bug in Jianye, where if you don't upgrade to a city level and see 4 building slot, you're not going to see the AI state workshop building because they ignore the hardware building for some reason and build an extra slot, even though you don't get that extra building slot until you upgrade to city. So that's something we also see in one of our campaigns. I believe our Sun Ce campaign saw that bug, and this was patched out halfway in our campaign and was fixed. And then similarly, you also had an issue where you couldn't convert or downgrade the bandit buildings, and that was something that's fixed here now. And then small bugs like Sun Ce's kingdom flag wasn't updated correctly when he became a kingdom. Horse speed update is very important. Basically, all cavalry units got buffed in 1.5, but the horses on generals didn't get buffed. So this allowed enemy cavalry to chase you down quite easily. And now they went back in and upgraded the speed for all the horses. So now you'll be able to use your generals against enemy cavalries and run away like normal. If you have a low tier horse, you'll probably be faster. We have bandit skill giving attribute points. This is actually a huge change. So when first Mandate of Heaven came out, you notice that Zhang Jiao and all the yellow turban skills didn't give attribute points. And by attribute points, I'm talking about expertise, cunning, the 5 element stat points. You didn't get any. And the bandit skill had the same issue. And that actually nerfed these characters because if you're playing as a Hun character with a skill tree, you get 8 points of stat with each skill. But for the bandit and yellow turban ones, the skills you pick up don't give you any stat. That's a big nerf. And they went back in, and now bandit skills all have that attribute point. And we're going to see a later on change. We're not there yet, but I think the yellow turbans also got some attribute point back. So that's good. And lastly, we have another Mandate of Heaven bug where prime minister positions were not appearing correctly for many factions. I never experienced this, but maybe it's a thing because Mandate of Heaven is just loaded with bugs. Moving forward, on the 5th group, we have another building bug, Jian'an. You can't build any buildings once you colonize it because of the building slot issue. Once again, you just are not able to. There used to be an issue like this with Nanhai on patch 1.3 or something, but they're slowly getting around to these things. And then a bunch of typo fixes, some notification fixes. There's a family state fix where Yan Baihu starts out with lower family state than he should, only on the 190 start. And then we have a buff to Sun Ce, like he needs a buff. So he's going to get the same faction mechanic as Sun Jian, where all his harbor level 5 building will give 25% faction-wide commerce boost. So huge income boost. Don't know why Sun Ce need any more help. He's probably the strongest faction in the game with so many mechanics added to his kit. And then another few building changes. We have Taoist Temple not being upgraded correctly at the Temple County, the only one in Pengcheng. And then also this is a good income change. So copper and iron mine will now give industry income as well as banditry income for bandit factions. So that's the complaint where you had so much banditry income that you lost a lot of your base commerce and especially base industry income. So it's nice to see 2 other mines give out industry income as well. Closing out our campaign changes, we have a few things, another just minor fixes. Lu Bu's faction select screens change so that you can see camp crushers and flying riders as the unique unit. You still have access to Xiliang cavalry and heavy Xiliang cavalry. So basically Lu Bu and Sun Ce are factions that inherited the old faction units, but also the new faction unit. And they just wanted to display the new faction unit to let you know you have those, because you assume you already have the Xiliang cavalries. Similarly with Sun Ce, you have all the mercenary units from Sun Jian, but you also get tiger guards and handmade guards. So that's just a change for Lu Bu to showcase the 2 new unit. The greatest warrior fix we talked about with Guo Jia. Dilemma choice layout issue was basically if you have like 4 choices, the second choice, sometimes you can't click it because of the way the layout was fixed. So they fixed that. And then flying riders here. They are now giving it correctly to all general classes instead of just vanguards and starting at rank 2. Now personally, flying riders is not that good. I'd much rather have Xiliang cavalry. Just stat check wise, Xiliang cavalry is just better. So it's not a big deal here. We have a really funny fix for Empress and Emperor, because I think when they programmed in the Emperor or Empress titles for bandit factions, they used Zheng Jiang as the template. So she was called Empress once she turned into king rank. Now, what CA likes to do is they like to do a lot of copy and pasting. So that's why we see a lot of these typos. Basically, they copy and pasted her rank up to the other 2 bandits when they did the revamp. So if you get Zhang Yan and Yan Baihu ranking up to king, they will be called Empress for a while if you were not on patch 1.5.2. So that's pretty funny. And then another few things not working correctly. Master of Writing, which is a title you can unlock, was not correctly applying public order bonuses. And assignment for the bandit skill Villainy was not given to the character after you unlock Villainy. And finally, Cao Xing, which is an event for Lu Bu faction. He was spawning before the event triggered, so you could get him before he joins you through the event, which could cause duplicate situations or just broke the event chain. So that's all the campaign changes. This is a pretty good chunk of the change in the game, but once again, not too much balance changes, a lot of bug fixing still. If we move on to battles, we're going to see more balance changes. So first and foremost, as you have seen in our recent video, Zhou Tai is straight up broken. And he was even more broken before this patch, because before this patch, his Undying Vow was passive, and it didn't even check to see if it was activating with the right conditions, which requires all his Oath Thorns to be alive on the map. Now it's an active ability. So there's still problems with this, because let's say your Oath Thorns are on the map, you just hide them, you just go in the battle, click it first thing, and in the battle itself, if you're fighting manually, it's the same thing as before. He's still ridiculous, and we're showcasing that a ton. I know it feels a little cheesy, but the game just made him too strong to refuse him. So, who am I to say no to using Zhou Tai? The thing they have now is it deactivates correctly, which is good. And because it's an active ability, you can't auto-resolve with him, because the AI would not be activating it for him correctly in the auto-resolve values, where before it's passive is always considered part of the value, and it give you ridiculous auto-resolves where he just auto-resolve and kill 1,000 men by himself. That's just straight up too ridiculous. Another fix they have is Sun Ce's Blood Fury, which is his middle skill. It was unusable before because it basically made him uncontrollable in fights as you charge up, but now they made it just dueling only. So you only start triggering this when dueling. So it's okay to be uncontrollable when you're dueling, because unless you're escaping, you're really not going to do very much with your character. So it gives you a nice damage boost, and I think that's worthwhile to use as Sun Ce. And then we have a few things of nerf. Zhanma Jian and the handmade guards that were added to the game were too strong, so they nerfed those a little bit. And they also nerfed damage resistant in general. So Xu Chu had a very strong damage resistant boost for generals near him, and so did handmade guard. But funny enough, Tiger Guard is not included in this nerf. So Tiger Guard should still give the old resistant level, which makes your general really, really sturdy. Poison Volley for Yanbaihu half duration, but I think it's not a nerf, it's just a fix to match the other Poison Volleys on generic Sentinels. And then we have some increased ammunition for mounted crossbow. I think this is just to balance it with mounted archers, which also saw ammunition increases on 1.5, just making it similar. And then changes to knowledge of body healing value was included in patch 1.5.0, where healing was nerfed a lot. So Yellow Turban healing was also nerfed, and I think they missed knowledge of body skill, so they kind of tuned it down in this patch here. The next fix, I don't actually know what it is. It says Tail Hunters were using wrong attribute sets. Does this mean they were showing up as a different color, kind of like Guosi, but it was not affecting the unit? Like perhaps it was showing up not as a blue unit and it was showing up as like a red unit. That could make sense. Next one is Mercenary Cavalry Captains now use cavalry spacing rather than infantry spacing. So I think this was just the oversight with Sun Jian's captains, where they kind of programmed it in as infantry, so it was probably more clumped than you want it to be with the cavalry. And then Tell Sisters and Zhang Brothers' ability now have correct deactivation conditions, meaning one of them dies on the battlefield, I guess. So that's fixed there. Even though I'm still having trouble seeing it active on the battle. I have not actually seen visible evidence that when you have two of the Zhang brothers, Zhang Hong and Zhang Zhao, who are not related, they're not actual brothers. The Tell Sister are actual sisters. The Zhang brothers are like bros. Let's just say bros. When they're on the field together, I don't see their ability triggering. So I still question how to trigger it and how to deactivate it. So it seems to be logical to just have both of them there and it activates for the whole map. But I don't think it works like that. So I'm still trying to figure that out going forward. Then we have a whole page here. This is basically giving unique faction units to generals in multiplayer. So basically, if Chen Gong is classified as Lu Bu's faction, he has access to all of Lu Bu's unit if you want to play him that way in multiplayer. So this is just a pretty simple fix there for all sorts of generals that were added in recently. Deltran also pick up a unique weapon at Enchantress level, which is the highest tier in the multiplayer selection screen. So basically you get a new weapon, same as Xun Yu, Marquise of Wan Sui, which is his title for higher tier. So that's a couple of changes to multiplayer battle. And then we have a huge list here. So this thing goes on, and we don't need to talk about this much. This basically gives mid-tier units access to Smokescreen, Caltrap, and basically these abilities that were added in for low-tier units, but they were just not given to elite units. So you often see your elite unit, the one with the yellow circle around them, not have access to these things that your mercenary militia units had. So that's why they added it. So now everyone has them. They also added some formations for the Mandate of Heaven unit that didn't have them before, mainly some Yellow Turban unit and some cavalry. Not going to go over all of these. Basically, units got formations and got abilities that they should be able to use if you have unlocked the right reform or have the right strategists in the army. So that's everything there. And that wraps up 1.5.2. It's a very long patch note rundown. We tend to do this a lot. It's a long patch. But in the end, we're going to talk about 1.5.3, which is in beta. I'm not currently using this for my system just because I'm running a modded campaign right now and I don't want to mess that one up with the beta version. But the fixes are very minimum, and we take credit for another fix here again. They restored Liu Hong's family state income to 200% instead of 2%, which is clearly a typo, and we suffer through that on our recent campaign. We are missing about 3,960 gold per turn, and we still whooped that campaign in 7 episodes. So glad we got that fixed for all of you guys if you guys want to play him. Other than that, very few things. There was a lag issue when you demand abdicate and when you occupy settlements. We definitely saw this in some of our recent campaigns, where after a battle, I would experience this really long lag in the post-battle screen after you click occupy. And that was because they were checking character attributes in the background way too often. And this had been now corrected. So hopefully If you enter the 1.5.3 beta, opt into it, you'll experience less lag. We're still going to suffer through it on MTU, just because I want to keep it on 1.5.2, not to break the game or anything. And aside from that, we have attributes given to character abilities. So we talked about this, how Yellow Turbans didn't get attribute attached to their new abilities. So I think it fixed it for all the Mandated Heaven. Once again, all the bugs are on Mandated Heaven. That's just the way it is. And continue that theme. We have some Yellow Turban unit with Spear Wall instead of a Shield Wall. So that's fixed too. And lastly, you know how in 1.5.2 we talked about Zhan Ma Jian Imperial unit being added into 8 princes? Apparently Sima Ai was left out, and he's the only prince who didn't get access to these units, probably due to his slightly more unique building chains, and he gets them now, so that's good. Now that's all the fixes they did for 1.5.3, but they also made an announcement here talking about what changes they're working on going forward, and that is Yellow Turban characters being able to be recruited by non-Yellow Turbans and vice versa. Basically, the culture boundary there was not working, and you often see available Yellow Turban units for hire, and you often see Yellow Turbans recruiting Han units. That shouldn't be a thing in the future. It's not fixed yet, but they're working on that. They're also working on an issue where you can grant independence as Yellow Turban faction. This is with your administrators, which I think are called local leaders for Yellow Turbans, and this should not be a thing, so they're taking that away, because I don't think you're allowed to have vassals as Yellow Turbans, so it doesn't make sense for you to be able to grant independence. Fix for cavalry unit added in a world betrayed being unable to dismount. I actually haven't ran into this issue, but I'm sure it's there. And there's also a fix for armies being able to replenish on river in double time stance. So that sounds pretty ridiculous, and I'm glad they're trying to fix that. I don't know why it would be an issue in the first place, because once you go in river, it's just disable replenishment no matter what stance you're in. But apparently on double time, you can get some replenishment back. So that's nice to know. So that wraps up our patch rundown. Fairly long, but hope you guys enjoyed it. And we'll see you guys when they have a new patch, which I believe after 1.5.3 is probably going to come with the next DLC or something. We will see patch 1.6. I doubt they'll do 1.5.4, given how small 1.5.3 is already. So hope you guys enjoyed this one. See you guys next time. Bye.